Welcome back. Let's use some more jQuery. In this lecture, we'll use it to create some scrolling effects. So, there's two things that we need to do. First, we need to define what happens when we hit these buttons, because so far they don't do anything at all. And then what happens when we hit these navigation buttons right here, right? So let's start with the easier ones, which are these two. So this is the main call to action button, and so we want this to scroll to the most important section, which is the pricing plan section. So this will go all the way down to this section here, where the user can then make an action, which is signing up for one of these plans. And the second one, show me more, will just scroll down here. So we'll start doing that. And in jQuery, that's actually pretty straightforward. Let me just comment my code here so that when I come back later, I don't get lost with this. So this is for the sticky navigation. And now scroll on buttons. Alright, and this is actually pretty forward. So first up, we need to define some classes for each of those buttons so that we can then select them. And we need a unique class for each of them. And as before, we want to have a name only for the jQuery. So I will call this one scroll to plan. Because this way, when we look at this class name, we know exactly what should happen. Scroll to start. Okay, great. So copy this one. And so, maybe you can already guess what happens now. So I will select this, and then I will say click. And this defines what happens when we click on that button. So function at this is actually always the same. So now this is a little bit strange, because in order to make the animated scroll, we need to select HTML and body. And then we use the animate method and like this. So scroll top, and now we select the section where we want to go to. Again, all of this is maybe a little bit weird. You don't have to understand exactly what goes on here. Just make sure that you understand the basic way that we use jQuery. So now we need to select the section. And the first one is the plans. And as before, I will use a special class name, section plans. And we can just do the same for this one here. Oh, we already have it. Okay, so we don't have to define this here. So let's select that, section plans, and then offset and top. And the other value we need for the animation is the speed, and we will say 1000 milliseconds, which is a second. So again, what happens here? We select this class, and when we click on it, this happens. So we have an animation which scrolls to the top of the JS section plans section with a speed of 1 second. Here we go. Alright, here we are. And this is cool, right? So this is a nice effect. I'm going to show it to you again. Alright, and now let's do the same thing for the other one. So I'll just duplicate this here. Don't want to write it all over again. So this is scroll to start. And now this is section futures. Hopefully this works as well, and yeah, it does. So here we are. So this was pretty easy. Next up, we need to make sure that each time we click on one of these links, we actually get to the section that we want. Now, as I told you before, we many times use JavaScript plugins in order to do some stuff, or you can just Google for some jQuery snippets, which is like code that someone else writes and that you can then use in your website. And we will now do that because we don't always have to write everything from scratch. We can use something that someone else used. So in this case, I found this little script here, and we will use that to do exactly what we want with that navigation. So navigation, scroll, and let me just copy this to this place here. And now, how do we make this work? First, we need to go back to our HTML navigation and define some anchors. And anchors are like this. We write this hash symbol and then we define a name. So food delivery here will be for the futures. And then we come here and define an ID with that exact name. And so now this is an anchor to this here. And this should actually already work. So let's check this. Okay, I click here and yeah, it takes me exactly to the place that I want to. Fantastic. So now let's repeat the same thing for the others as well, because these two of course not work yet. So this one will be works, this one will be cities, and this one will be plans. So this is the meals one and this is the works. So ID and just works. Then the same for cities. And now for the plans as well. ID, plans. And I guess now our navigation is ready to work. So let's start by clicking here, sign up, and it takes us exactly to the place we want. And now cities and how it works and food delivery. Okay, fantastic, exactly what we want. And so now you see how useful it actually is that this navigation bar always stays on top of everything, right? So this is really quite useful. We can just click everywhere we want and it takes us to the exact place. So let's just look at this code so that we can understand what happens here. So basically what this says is it selects a link element where the href attribute starts with an hash symbol. Then we click it, and this is not so important here. Basically, what happens then, if that element exists, then we scroll to it, and this is actually the same kind of code we used up here, right? So we select the HTML body, we animate it, and then we scroll to the top of the section, and also in 1 second. We could of course change this, make the animations faster or slower, but 1 second is kind of cool. So now we know how to write some code on ourselves, we know how to use code from someone else, and we even used a small plugin. And so in the next section we will use one more thing, and this will be animations on scroll. and I'm sure you will like that as well.